Well, good morning, Neighborhood Church. How are we feeling this morning? Good. So good to be hanging out with you today. My name is Jordan. I'm part of the team here, and today we're going to be continuing our series, This Verse Changed My Life. But before we do, I want to get interactive for a moment. By a show of hands, how many of you today have ever said something before that you regret? A lot of hands there. You know, I'm going to throw 2 hands up in the air. We all know what it's like to embarrass ourselves by saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. We all have those moments where we didn't quite think before we said that thing, and then those moments end up haunting us again and again throughout our lives. Let me ask you another question. Have you ever been winding down for the day? You're mellowing out, you're getting ready for bed, you've brushed your teeth and thrown on your PJs, you said your bedtime prayers, got into bed, got under the covers, turn off the lamp, put your head on the pillow, take a deep breath, and then suddenly remember every embarrassing thing you've ever said in your entire life. Does that happen to anyone else or just me? That happens to me all the time. It's like listening to your least favorite song on loop over and over again. It's like those sports blooper replays you see on ESPN, only instead it's your own social awkwardness on display. It's every single conversational blunder you've ever had. It's all those relational follies we tend to fall into. We've all been embarrassed by our own words. Yes, we've all said things we regret. Our words get us into trouble. Let me tell you a few stories, for example. I had this friend, and she went to a wedding, and one of her friends was a bridesmaid in the wedding. And that night at the reception, she went up to this bridesmaid and she said, "Oh my gosh, friend, you look so gorgeous. You know what? You better be careful. You're going to upstage the bride. You're 10 times prettier than she is." She saw a look of horror on the bridesmaid's face, turned around and saw that the bride had been standing right behind her the whole time and heard everything. Here's another story a friend told me. I had a coworker who worked with a lady who was pregnant. Now, you can probably already see where this one's going. One day, my friend in the office goes up to this coworker, and he asks that dreaded question that no one should ever ask under any circumstances whatsoever. He went up to this gal and he said, "Hey, coworker, so when's the baby due?" After a brief awkward silence, she said, "Well, what do you mean? I had the baby 3 months ago." That's a tough one. Now, me personally, I love when my friends embarrass themselves. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy on the inside. But if I'm being honest, I am the worst of all. Confession time. Sometimes I struggle to think before I speak. And there's been many, many times I've put my foot in my mouth. For instance, years ago, when I was a teenager, I was driving home one night. I pulled into the neighborhood, into the driveway, and I looked and I saw there was a group of people wandering around our block, and they had flashlights and GPS trackers. Some of them were wearing orange vests and headlamps and other gear. And it was an odd sight, so naturally, my curiosity got the best of me. I wandered over to this group of people, and without thinking, I just loudly asked, "Hey, so what's the deal? You guys doing a scavenger hunt or something? Looks pretty fun." This guy looks me dead in the eyes and says, "We're looking for a missing child." You can imagine I was a little bit embarrassed at that moment. It's okay, guys, you can laugh. The child was okay. They found the child. I'm allowed to tell that story. Good gracious. The point is, I embarrassed myself. I was very apologetic, but as I laid there in bed that night, I couldn't help but replay that awkward moment over and over again. That one didn't do it for you. Let me tell you another story. I'm going to keep taking a crack at this until someone smiles here. I worked at Old Navy when I was 17. Yes, Old Navy, the South Hill Mall in Puyallup, Washington, the pinnacle of fashion. As you can imagine, working in retail led to many awkward encounters, but there's one in particular that takes the cake. I was out there on the sales floor with my little Old Navy headset, folding mountains of denim that customers had just haphazardly thrown all over the place, because, that's what you do when you go in Old Navy or Ross. You just start throwing things on the ground. So I'm minding my own business, and this customer comes up to me and said, older lady, and she can't find the size of garment she's looking for. So I go into the back. I can't find it in the stock room. And I come back out, and when I tell her, she is very upset about this information. She begins to start being very verbally abusive, berating me and insulting me. And for whatever reason, she claimed that I was, body shaming her or something. I was very confused and very upset. Now, this might seem like a shocking story, shocking behavior, but for those of you who work retail, this is just every Tuesday afternoon at the Old Navy. So she ends her rant, and she walks away. And I've got to admit, I was feeling a little offended. I was feeling a little hot under the collar. So I stomped back to the fitting room in the back where my friend Jessica was folding clothes. Again, you see the common thread, lots of folding in this story. And I immediately began to tell her about this terrible interaction I had with this horrible, horrible customer. And if you can believe it, my language was very colorful. The insults went flying. The swear words were pouring forth from my mouth like Niagara Falls as I absolutely eviscerated this customer behind her back. It was at this very moment that the fitting room door directly in front of me slowly opened to reveal who else but the very same customer from earlier. The awkward silence was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Her face filled with rage, and she pointed at me. She said, "I just heard everything you said. I want to talk to your manager right now, mister." Now, at that point, I had two options. Option A, apologize profusely to the customer, try and make things right. But then there was also option B, which was to double down. Now, which one do you think I chose? It was B, because I live my life by one motto and one motto only: always double down. At that moment, I looked her in the eye and I said, "You know what? I'm glad you heard what I said. You're a terrible person, and I'm not sorry." Miraculously, I was not fired. I don't understand it to this day. I'm starting to think that maybe Old Navy's hiring standards aren't maybe super high. But as funny as that story may have been, satisfied as I may have felt, it calls for reflection. Maybe that wasn't the right thing to say. Maybe that wasn't the right moment to vent that anger. Now, there's a point to all these stories today. We've been in this series, This Verse Changed My Life. And all month long, we've had members of our teaching team up here talking about scriptures that have influenced and impacted them. And honestly, as you can imagine, when I talk to the different members of the teaching team, they've said this is a really hard series to prepare for because there are so many scriptures that have influenced our lives in major ways. You've got the teachings of Jesus. You've got the stories from the early church. You've got the letters in the New Testament, and all of it is chock full of wisdom and insights that have changed how I think, how I live, and how I treat others. But today I thought it'd be fun to get super practical. And I actually want to jump back into the Old Testament today to an ancient collection of Hebrew wisdom called Proverbs. Now, throughout the New Testament, you'll see the authors going back and quoting this collection of wisdom. Because despite its age, Proverbs has been a huge influence on the Christian church, even from day one. This morning, I want to share a verse, or more specifically, a proverb that has changed my life. A piece of wisdom that continues to challenge me, honestly, on a daily basis. The thing is, it's not long, it's not complicated, it's not really hard to understand, but it's really hard to put into practice. Without further ado, here's what it is. This verse changed my life. Proverbs 17:28. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. Man, I just kind of love that verse. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, it's a little bit sarcastic, but it's challenging. It's inspirational. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. This is one of many, many verses in Proverbs talking about the power of our words. In fact, if you look through the Old Testament and read through the New Testament, you'll find one theme abundantly clear, and it's this: our words matter. As you can imagine, as a young man who struggled to think before speaking, someone who's constantly saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, this idea was a game changer. And it still is. Even today, as I struggle to use my words in a constructive manner, this little proverb reminds me, hey, many times silence is better than having a slippery tongue. And when I say that, I'm talking about the insults. I'm talking about the cursing. I'm talking about the gossip, the slander, talking bad about people behind their backs, being rude, being brash. We can use our words to wreak havoc, really. We can belittle people, we can tear them down, we can destroy others. Our words can cut like a knife that actually leaves scars on people's emotions for years and years. I'm sure all of you have heard that old nursery rhyme, Sticks and Stones, right? That's familiar. It was written by a guy named Alexander William Kinglake in 1830. He published this little rhyme to help school children be more resilient when it came to bullying. It goes like this: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never harm me. Does anyone actually believe that? Because I certainly don't. As popular as this little nursery rhyme is, I think we can all admit it's far from the truth. Words have an impact. Words can hurt. Words can be devastating. I love Eugene Peterson's translation of Proverbs 15:4, which says the exact opposite of this nursery rhyme. Here's what it says. It says, kind words heal and help, cutting words wound and maim. I'm sure many of you can remember things that have been said to you throughout your life that honestly are still painful to think about all these years later. Our words matter. Our words create worlds, as one author said. And so throughout my life, I've been challenged by scriptures like these Proverbs, and I start to wonder questions like this: what kind of world am I creating with my words? In my home, in my workplace, in my community, in my world, what kind of world am I creating with my words? Am I using my words to build up and encourage other people, or am I using my speech to manipulate, coerce, and bully others? I think this is a question we should ask ourselves over and over again. But the problem is, it's so much easier to just run our mouths than it is to practice discipline and self-awareness. We live in a hyper-verbal world, do we not? In fact, language is one of the defining traits of humanity. I have this old Pink Floyd album from the early 90s. It's fantastic. And there's a song on there. It's one of my favorites. It's called Keep Talking. Great song, great guitar solo. Check it out. But at the beginning of this song, they play a quote from the legendary physicist Stephen Hawking. I thought it was interesting what he said. Stephen Hawking says this in the song: "For millions of years, mankind lived just like the animals. Then something happened which unleashed the power of our imagination. We learned to talk and we learned to listen. Speech has allowed the communication of ideas, enabling human beings to work together to build the impossible." He goes on to say this: "Mankind's greatest achievements have come about by talking, and its greatest failures by not talking. It doesn't have to be like this. Our greatest hopes could become reality in the future. With the technology at our disposal, the possibilities are unbounded. All we need to do is make sure we keep talking." And then David Gilmour rips into that guitar solo. Now, this is a pretty optimistic take, right, about human communication and technology. And whether or not you agree with Stephen Hawking's anthropology, that's not really the point. The point I'm making is words make us who we are as human beings. Language is a part of humanity, for better and most certainly for worse. And this has only been exacerbated in the past few decades by technology and social media. Because like never before in human history, we have the ability to speak and amplify our voices. In the blink of an eye, I can hop on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and without thinking, say whatever I want to whomever I want in a millionth of a second, and it's traveled all around the globe. This means things like hate speech and misinformation and digital manipulation and cyberbullying and all this nasty stuff. Really, social media is not the root cause of these things. Really, it just amplifies the worst parts of our humanity. Pink Floyd and Stephen Hawking say we need to keep talking. And yes, I think that's true, but the author of Proverbs would also add, maybe we need to slow down just a little bit. Maybe we need to think before we speak. Maybe silence is actually preferable when our language is not constructive. Many years later, after Proverbs was compiled, there was an early leader in the Christian church named James. James was the half-brother of Jesus, and he wrote a letter to the Christians living in Jerusalem. He said this: all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. James was emphatic when he taught the earliest Christians that our words matter. And this is such an important lesson for the church today, a lesson that we tragically get wrong generation after generation, because an overwhelming majority of people I've talked to who have left the Christian faith have done so because someone somewhere at some church in some town said something that hurt them. Maybe you're here today and you've experienced some of those words. Sinner, backslider, fake Christian, lukewarm believer, harlot, Jezebel, abomination, you're going to hell, you don't belong here. Any sort of language like that, which honestly, those words sound so extreme, it's almost comical to me. But almost every single week I talk to somebody who's experienced that. I find that hard to believe. I find that tragic because those words and that posture really don't reflect the heart of Jesus. And yet I hear story after story of people who carry these deep scars, this church hurt that they're wrestling with because people said something to them. I think if you look throughout history and study the Christian church, you'll see that many times religion uses words as weapons. Right? Weapons to threaten people, to subjugate or control people. But that's not what Jesus modeled at all, in the least bit. In fact, if you read the biographies of Jesus, you'll see he had strong words of his own for religious people who use words as weapons. Listen to what Jesus said to the corrupt religious authorities of his day. He starts with a metaphor. He says, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. He explains what that means. He says, you brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. This is the point, guys. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. Jesus is saying not only do our words matter, but our words are actually a window that lets people see the condition of our very souls. Let's pause for a moment. You know what I absolutely hate? Smog checks. It seems like every time the car is up for registration, we've got to go get it smogged. This means I've got to take time out of my day, or rather my wife has to take time out of her day, let's be honest, to drive across town, find some sort of mechanic that's not going to rip us off because we don't really know anything about cars. I mean, hello, I took a year of auto shop in high school. I can barely change a tire. Thankfully, I have my dad on speed dial. But everyone hates smog checks. They're expensive, they're inconvenient, And yet, to some degree, our air quality is dependent on them. Now, I'm no expert, obviously, but here's how it works. The mechanic checks your exhaust that your car's putting out to make sure it's at a reasonable level. So basically, if you roll in there in your 1992 Honda Accord and your tailpipe is emitting like billowing clouds of black smoke, not only are you not going to pass smog, there's probably a good chance something's wrong with your engine. When it comes to our vehicles, our exhaust output can help mechanics determine the health of our engine. Do you see the strained metaphor I'm trying to make here? Also, if you're a mechanic, please don't come hassle me after service. I know I don't know what I'm talking about. But here's the point. This is what Jesus is saying about our words. If our words are a constant billowing cloud of smoke that's creating a toxic smog, it's a guaranteed sign that something is wrong in the engine of our hearts. So anytime I find myself using abusive language, destructive language, I remember, hey, maybe it's time for some self-reflection. Maybe it's time to check my heart. Whenever I gossip about others, whenever I trash talk or insult people or weaponize my language in any way, it's always a red flag that something is wrong in my spirit. Likewise, whenever I meet a new person, like an acquaintance or a friend, if I go on their social media, the first thing I see is just an endless stream of trash talk and inflammatory language and antagonistic energy. It really tells me all I need to know about that person. It also tells me that I'd probably rather just steer clear. I've actually heard countless stories of people who've been rejected for jobs because in the interview process, the employer went onto their social media and saw the nonsense they were writing and said, ooh, no thank you. Whether we like it or not, there's a correlation between what we say and who we are. This is what Jesus is meaning when he says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. There's a correlation between what we say and who we are. Now, for me personally, I get down on my knees every single morning, and I thank God that when I was a teenager, all we had was MySpace. Does anyone remember MySpace? Tom, everyone was friends with Tom. This was the first big social media platform. It hit when I was 14. And I thank God every day that that's all we had when I was a teenager. Because all the stupid stuff I ever wrote and posted on the internet is now long gone. You can't find it. When they deleted MySpace, they deleted the most embarrassing years of my life. And I'm very, very grateful for it. You might be wondering, well, how embarrassing could it be, Jordan? Well, take a look at my profile photo from when I was 16 years old. Does that look like someone who has something good to say online? Okay, please take that off the screen. But real talk, all jokes aside, if you're a follower of Jesus, can you do me a favor? Can you please be mindful of what you post online? What you say matters, and whether you agree or not, what you say on the internet matters. So let's all agree not to make Jesus look bad by being a jerk online. Let's not say stuff online we wouldn't say in real life. Let's not be passive aggressive. Let's not drop obnoxious hot takes on every single issue. And please don't get into flame wars in the comments of your Aunt Shirley's posts. Also, maybe don't overshare too. I don't need to know what you had for breakfast this morning. Now, our words matter. And if we follow Jesus, I think genuinely that's something we want to do. Our hearts are going to align with his way of love and grace. And so far, if our hearts are aligned with Jesus, then our words, and by extension, our digital activity should be an expression of that posture. And listen, if you don't remember any of this, I just want to drop on you the words of a very famous, revered theologian. He's a bunny rabbit. He's in Walt Disney's Bambi, and his name is Thumper. And he said this: if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. Rabbi Thumper, we see you, we hear you. It's simple, right? But it's hard to live out. Now, going back to our Proverbs, let's throw that up again. Proverbs 17:28. Again, there's almost kind of a A little bit of a jab here. I love it. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he's deemed intelligent. Now, obviously, the author is using a bit of hyperbole, right? As much as we want, we can't move to monasteries and wear brown robes and do a vow of silence. We have to communicate with one another. So, how do we do better? None of us are perfect, but how can we make incremental improvements? How can we look more and more like Jesus in our speech? Well, I think, one, obviously, we just make the decision to become students and apprentices of Jesus. We make the decision, you know what, I want my actions, words, and lifestyle to be a reflection of his divine love. But speaking more specifically this morning, I think we just need to be more mindful of our words. I think we need to think before we speak. And in fact, I want to share 4 things I think we should be mindful of. When it comes to our words, we should be mindful of these 4 things: what we say, how we say it, when we say it, and where we say it. If you can run your speech and emotions and thoughts through these 4 filters, I think your life will improve significantly. So let's walk through these. Now, first and foremost, obviously, we need to think about what we say. You know, is this helpful or harmful? Is this constructive or destructive? Is there any purpose to my words, or am I just spewing hot air because I love the sound of my own voice? Am I being honest? Am I being accurate? Do I even know what I'm talking about? These are questions we should be mulling over. And I can remember back in elementary school, I think I even saw this on my daughter Evelyn's wall in her classroom. There's this poster teachers hang up that says this: before you speak, think. T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? K, is it kind? This cute little poster on kindergarten walls is actually quite profound. Imagine a world where Mark Zuckerberg and his Silicon Valley cronies created an algorithm where every social media post had to be run through this filter. I think overnight, society would transform into a utopia. Or more realistically, social media would just crash and burn and cease to exist. We need to think about what we say, right? That's just common sense. But that's not all. We also need to be mindful of how we say it, how we say what we say. Our tone matters. Our posture matters. Saying the right thing with the wrong attitude can be just as destructive. Now, have you guys ever met someone before who would describe themselves as being brutally honest? Right, we all know that person. I think really saying you're brutally honest is just a nice way of saying you're a jerk, but people continue to say that. Now, there's a Christian version of this that's kind of a pet peeve of mine as well. It's this phrase, it's speak the truth in love. Now, before you burn me at the stake, I just want to say, yes, the Apostle Paul wrote this. Yes, this is a fantastic Christian principle that I think we should reflect on and incorporate into our lives. But here's the problem. So many times I see in the church, speak the truth in love is just interpreted as, well, I can just say whatever I want as long as I say it in a nice, polite way, you know. Some of the most offensive, racist, sexist, whatever-ist things I've ever heard my entire life have been kind of smothered in a smooth layer of Christian politeness, you know. It's when that person says, oh, bless your soul, dear. Bless your soul. That's not exactly what it means to speak the truth in love. Speaking the truth in love means meditating not only on what you're saying, but how you're saying it and how those two things interact. How can my tone and posture create the best outcome for everyone in any given situation, regardless of the subject matter? How can I best reflect the love of Jesus even in the hardest conversations and conflicts? And many times, if we really want to speak the truth in love, we need to learn when not to speak at all. We should be mindful of what we say, how we say it, but also when and where we say it. There's a 17th century French philosopher named Voltaire who wasn't a big fan of Christianity, but he said something I found very interesting. He said this, everything you say should be true, but not everything true should be said. Everything you say should be true, but not everything true should be said. You probably shouldn't argue over marital spats in front of your kids in the kitchen. You probably shouldn't, give your substance abusing friend an intervention in mixed company. If you're an employer, you probably shouldn't berate and correct and scold your individual employees in the all-staff meeting where everyone can see. You probably shouldn't rush to your grieving friends who've lost a loved one and say things like, it'll work out in the end. God's got a plan, right? The right thing said at the wrong time is the wrong thing to say. Our words matter. They have an impact on our world. So as faithful followers of Jesus, those of us who want to walk in his way of love, we should be mindful of what we say, how we say it, when we say it, and where we say it. And as a person who regularly puts their foot in their mouth, listen, I'm teaching to myself today. There's so many things I've said over the years that I regret. There's things I said last week that I regret, that I wish I could take back. And I suspect that's the same for you as well. There are days when our speech, it's beautiful. It's like music on the air. But then there are other days where it's just toxic fumes choking the life out of everybody. I have to wonder. I have to use my imagination. It's easy to get cynical in this age of social media and division and hatred all in the news and everywhere. I have to wonder, what would the world look like even if just the followers of Jesus would stop weaponizing our words? How would our community change? Our neighborhood church community, our Visalia community, your workplace, wherever. How would our community change if we all made a radical commitment to civility? To civility, something as simple as that. What if we began to truly acknowledge and understand the weightiness and the impact of our words on our world and others? As the Proverbs suggests, I think for a time we might all be a little bit quieter. Today, as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a thought from the author named Benjamin Barber, who advocated for radical civility. Here's what he said. He said, civility is a work of the imagination. For it's through the imagination that we render others sufficiently like ourselves for them to become subjects of tolerance and respect, if not always affection. Guys, I think this should be the gold standard for everyone. Maybe you're here and you don't believe in this Jesus thing. We're so glad you're here. We think you can belong before you believe. I think this should be the standard for everyone. But friends, if you're here and you follow Jesus, civility should honestly be the basement floor. Jesus has called us to so much more, to radical love and compassion and generosity, to be a light in the darkness, the salt of the earth. It's a weighty invitation. And it's a struggle, right? We've talked about a lot today. And if you go out of here and you don't remember a lot, there's one question I think you can always ask yourself. In any situation, in any circumstance, good times, bad times, no matter who you're with, when you're trying to think about what to say or do, you can always ask this question. It's this: what does love require of me? What does love require of me? What does love require of me? This thing's not working very well. Neighborhood, our words matter, so let's use them for good, shall we? Let's pray today. God, thank you so much for this time we can come together as a church family to worship and to really explore your wisdom, Lord. Father, first, would you just forgive us for all the ways that we use our words in a destructive manner, for the ways that we've weaponized our speech. Please forgive us for those sins. Please guide us. Please be patient with us as we learn to look more and more like Jesus each day. Would you help us to think before we speak? Would you help us meditate on what we say, when we say, where we say it, how we say it, all so we can share your love and glorify you. God, please be with us this week and beyond. We love you so much, and we're so grateful for you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.